The fog came down at dawn, and the lamb went east. 8 years she had kept that promise. 8 winters, 8 springs, never once a step past the old stone wall on the ridge. A dead woman's hand on her shoulder, a dead woman's voice in her ear.
Please don't.
Promise me,
My darling,
Linnea.
listen.
Not for any reason.
You must
not for
flee
any
now.
creature. And she had promised.
Promise me
and she
you'll
had kept
survive.
it until the bleeding came from the wrong side of the stones. Somewhere across that wall, a manor sat in a meadow that should not have been there. Somewhere in that manor, a man stood in a doorway with mud on his boots and grief in his blue eyes and a wolf's silence in his bones. Somewhere under both of them, the ground had been waiting for 22 years. It was about to remember her name. She put one hand on the wet stone. The lichen was cold. Her hand went warm. She stepped through. For 8 years, Linnea Harrow kept a promise to a dead woman. 8 winters, 8 springs. 8 times the spring lambs dropped in her care, and not one of them, not a single one, had ever wandered east. As if the land itself had been listening to her mother's voice and obeying it on her behalf. She had been 14 when she made the promises. Kneeling next to a sickbed that smelled of fever and rosemary, holding her mother's hand, watching the woman she loved most in the world disappear into the pillow, one breath at a time. Bossed me, Linnea. Promise me you will not go past the old stone wall on the east ridge, not for any reason, not for any creature. Promise me. She had promised. She was 22 years old now. And on the morning the fog came down at dawn, she broke that promise for the first time. For a lamb, a 3-week-old lamb with a crooked ear, the smallest creature in her flock, the one her ewe had refused to nurse. The one Linnea had bottle-fed at midnight in a barn that had no one in it but the 2 of them. A lamb she had named Thistle, a lamb that had a habit of finding the gaps in the stone wall that Linnea had not yet patched. Today the lamb had found the wrong gap. The fog rolled off the eastern ridge like smoke from a sizzle fire. Soft, heavy, the kind of fog that swallowed the world one stone at a time. By the time Linnea stepped out of her cottage with the bottle of warm milk in her hand, she could not see the well in her own yard, could not see the rowan tree her mother had planted, could not see the low stone wall that ran along the edge of the pasture. She could only hear the bleating, thin, desperate, 3 weeks old and already louder than half the grown ewes in the flock. Thistle, she muttered, don't you dare. Because the lamb had a habit of running, of finding the gaps, of looking for the mother who had refused to nurse her. So when the lamb ran, Linnea ran after. That was the deal. She pulled her cloak tight at the throat. Heather wool, her mother's. The tin clasp, shaped like a shepherd's crook, had gone cold against her collarbone. 22 years old, orphaned since 14, and still wearing a dead woman's coat to keep the rain out of her bones. Her boots squelched in the wet grass. Thistle, come here. Nothing, come here. You miserable little thing, bleat. Farther off now, east. Linnea froze, because east was the one direction her mother had forbidden her to walk. 8 years dead, and Linnea could still hear the woman's voice. Clear as a bell on a still morning, the mourn me, Linnea. She stood in the wet grass with the fog closing around her shoulders, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. A pull. Low in her chest, not in her head, in her ribs, in the soft hollow under her sternum where grief lived when she let it sit too long. The lamb bleated again. Farther. And Linnea Harrow, who had kept a dead woman's promise for 8 years, took her first step east. The wall was older than the village healer, who could remember 3 generations of shepherds. Older than the road that ran down to the lowland market. The stones were lichen gray. Some of them were the size of a man's chest. Most of them had fallen out of place over the centuries, and now slumped in the heather like old teeth in a tired jaw. The gap was new, a pile of stones knocked loose. Recently. The lichen on the inside faces still pale. Linnea stopped at the gap. Thistle's hoofprints went through it. Small, frantic. Already disappearing into the fog on the other side. She put her hand on one of the standing stones. The lichen was wet under her palm. Cold, and then her hand went warm, not the stone. Her hand a heat that started in her palm and ran up through her wrist and settled in the bones of her forearm. Not painful. Not even strange, really. Familiar in a way that made no sense at all. Like the moment when you walk into a room where someone has been waiting for you. Like the moment when you take off a wet coat and someone hands you a dry one before you ask. She pulled her hand back. The heat stayed. "All right," she whispered. "To no one, to the wall. To the 8 years dead promise hanging in the fog like wet laundry." Right, I'm sorry, Mama." But the lamb, she stepped through the gap. The ground on the other side was not different. Same heather, same wet grass, same gray, except her boots felt heavier and her chest felt lighter. And somewhere very far away, a sound that was not quite a sound began to hum at the bottom of her hearing, like standing in a room with a beehive in the wall. She walked 2 minutes, 5, 10. The fog thickened. The bleeding grew louder. She could not see the wall behind her anymore. She could not see the ridge to her left. She could only hear the lamb and the soft, wet sound of her own boots in the grass and the hum in her bones that should not have been there at all. Then the meadow opened. It came out of the fog the way a ship comes out of a harbor. Slow, huge, surprising, wide and green and sloping gently down towards something Linnea could not yet make out. The grass here was different, tall, untrampled. Wildflowers she did not know the names of, growing in clumps the size of dinner plates. Thistle was halfway down the slope, standing in a patch of clover, chewing, looking up at Linnea with the bright, stupid eyes of a creature that had found paradise and had no intention of leaving. "You," Linnea hissed, crouching, inching closer. "You absolute disaster of a sheep." Thistle took 3 more steps into the clover. Linnea took 3 more steps after her, and the manor rose out of the fog. It was not a house. A house was the wooden box Linnea slept in. A house was a room with a hearth and a window and a roof that leaked when the wind came from the wrong direction. This was a manor, gray stone, thick with ivy that had probably been growing since before her grandmother was born. Tall windows dark with rain. A slate roof gone silver green with lichen and age. The kind of house that had been built by someone who wanted to disappear into the mountains and had largely succeeded. It rose out of the meadow like it had grown there. Linnea stopped moving, because for the second time that morning her hand had gone warm. Both hands, and her feet, and the soft hollow under her sternum where she had felt the pull at the wall. Now it was not a pull anymore. It was a settling, a weight finding its place. As if her body had been asking a question her whole life, and the ground beneath her boots had finally answered it. She did not understand. She did not have the words for what she was feeling. And she did not have the breath to look for the words. And she was 20 paces from a stranger's manor in the rain, with a lamb she could not catch. She took another step. That was when she saw him. A man, leaning in the open doorway of the manor, arms crossed, watching her, not the way a landowner watches a trespasser, not with anger, not even with curiosity exactly. He was watching her like a man watches a thing he has been waiting for without knowing he was waiting. Linnea froze. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. Not the broad of a soldier, the broad of a man who worked with his hands. Hair brown, curling slightly past his collar. The kind of hair a man stops cutting because no one has been there to tell him to. He wore a dark wool shirt with the sleeves shoved to his elbows. His boots were so caked in mud they could have been any color when they were new. No insignia. No jewelry. No coat against the rain. He looked like a groundskeeper. He was, Linnea thought, the most unremarkable man she had ever seen, until she looked at his eyes. His eyes were blue, not the pale ice blue of winter sky, not the dark inkwater blue of deep wells, the blue of clear sky at the very end of a long day, warm, steady, and edged with something she did not have a name for. Something that looked impossibly like recognition. "I'm sorry," she said. The words tumbled out before she could think about them. "I didn't mean to. The fog came down. My lamb. She got through the wall. I didn't know whose land. I'll get her." "I'll go," the man said nothing. His gaze moved from her face down to the lamb. Thistle, the traitor, had walked the rest of the way down the slope and was now sniffing at the toe of his muddy boot. He crouched, slow, smooth. The way a man crouched when he had crouched 1,000 times and never made the wrong motion. He held out one hand, palm up. "Open." Thistle put her nose against his palm. The man scratched behind the lamb's crooked ear, and Thistle made a sound of pure, embarrassing contentment. "She's young," he said. His voice was low. "Unhurried. 3 weeks," Linnea said, still wobbly in the back legs, still looking for a teat in every warm hand. Her mother rejected her. It was not a question. Linnea swallowed. How did you know? He looked up at her. The blue of his eyes held her like a hand at the back of her neck. I've watched a lot of lambs. He told her his name was Alaric. Just Alaric. No second name. No house. No title. She told him her name was Linnea Harrow. He repeated it back, quietly, as if testing the shape of it in his mouth. Then he nodded once and stepped back from the doorway, and the warmth of the house drifted out around her ankles like something alive. You're soaked through, he said. The fog won't lift before nightfall. The ridge paths are dangerous in weather like this. I'll manage. You'll fall. I've walked these paths since I was a girl. In clear weather, she opened her mouth to argue, closed it. Because he was right and she knew he was right. Stay, he said. The word landed strangely heavier than it should have, as if it contained more rooms than the sentence could hold. I can't impose, Linnea said. You're not imposing. I'm offering. He stepped fully out of the doorway, made the entrance wide. Did not reach for her. Did not gesture her in. Just opened the space and let her decide. Thistle was already trotting past his boots into the warm. Linnea looked at the fog. She looked at the ridge she could not see. She looked at the man who waited without pressure, without impatience, as if he had all the time in the world and intended to spend it exactly here. Just until the fog lifts, she said. He nodded. Just until the fog lifts. The inside of the manor was vast and quiet and filled with the particular kind of neglect that came not from poverty but from solitude. Grand rooms with furniture draped in white cloth that had gone gray with dust. Hallways where the only footprints in the dust were his. A kitchen large enough to feed 30 that showed every sign of feeding exactly one. He built up the fire in the main hall. The hearth was enormous, carved from a single slab of dark granite. Above the mantel hung a shield. Wood and beaten metal, the paint faded almost to nothing. A wolf's head surrounded by mountain laurel. Linnea looked at the shield, looked away. She did not know the crest, but she knew the shape of crests. The way they sat on a wall. The way men hung them above hearths, only when those men had things to remember. And the way the dust had been carefully wiped from this shield and from no other surface in the room. She did not ask. He brought her a wool blanket, a dry linen shirt that was far too big for her, and a bowl of soup that tasted of root vegetables and rosemary and patient simmering. She sat by the fire and ate. He sat across from her in a chair too large for the room, or built for a different century, or built for a different kind of man. The fire cracked. You live here alone, she asked, mostly. That's a lot of house for one person. It is, he said it without self-pity, without explanation. Just the way a man might say it is going to rain tomorrow. A fact, nothing for her to fix. Linnea pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She watched him over the rim of her bowl. He was looking at the fire, not at her, not staring. Not making her feel measured, but she could see, in the corner of his mouth, the soft thing that almost lived there. A place where a smile might come, if a smile were ever invited. You haven't told me about yourself, she said. No, is that on purpose? It is. She almost laughed. All right, he looked at her then. The blue of his eyes in the firelight was something she would think about. Later, when she could not sleep. Eat your soup, Linnea Harrow. He said so she did. She slept by the fire that night. He offered her a proper room. She declined. The hall, with the fire and the open space and the door she could see, was better. Old habit. The instinct of a woman who had spent 22 years living on the edges of other people's lives and had learned to keep an exit in her line of sight. He did not argue. He brought her blankets, stacked them next to the hearth without ceremony, said good night, Linnea, and walked out of the room. She listened to his footsteps go up the stairs. She listened to them stop somewhere above her head. She listened for a long time after that, for the sound of him moving, and never heard it. She did not sleep until the small hours. When she did, she dreamed of her mother's voice, singing old mountain songs without words. She dreamed she was a girl again, sitting on a low stool by another fire, in another stone room, and her mother was braiding her hair. Slow, patient, humming. And just before she woke in the dream, her mother stopped humming and bent down and whispered against her ear. I'm sorry I made you promise, Linnea. I am so sorry. The fog did not lift, not the next day, not the day after that. It sat on the mountain like a living thing, patient, thick, swallowing the paths and the walls and the world beyond the estate's boundaries. By the second morning, Linnea had stopped pretending she was going to leave at any moment. She told herself it was because of Thistle, who had settled into the manor's barn, as if she had been born in the straw there. She told herself it was because old Maeve back in Fenhollow had enough dried herbs to last another week. She told herself it was practical, reasonable, safe. She did not tell herself the truth, which was that every morning when she walked out of the manor's front door and felt the ground hum beneath her feet, something inside her exhaled, something that had been clenched tight for years, for her whole life. So she stayed, and he gave her space. He worked the land during the day, mending fences, clearing deadfall from the wood at the edge of the meadow, repairing a section of stone wall that had collapsed near the north boundary. He worked with his hands, with his back, with a quiet, focused intensity that suggested this was not labor performed out of necessity, but out of need. As if the physical work was the only thing keeping something inside him still. She watched him. She could not help it. She watched the way he laid his palm flat against the stone of a wall, sometimes, absently, the way you might touch the face of someone asleep. The way he stood at the edge of the meadow at dusk and looked out at the mountains as if he were waiting for something that had stopped coming a long time ago. On the second evening, she found him in the kitchen. He was struggling with a loaf of bread that had gone wrong in every way bread could go wrong. Too dense, too dry. The crust had a color in it that should not have existed in baked goods. She stood in the doorway and watched him fight with the dough. "That is not how you knead bread," she said. He looked up. Flour on his jaw. "Briska usually handles this." "Who is Briska?" "The housekeeper. She comes 3 days a week from the village. She'll be here tomorrow." "She is going to be furious." "At the bread?" "At me." "The bread is a symptom." Linnea did not mean to. She really did not. But a laugh came up out of her before she could stop it. Short, surprised, real. He looked at her like she had handed him something. She crossed the kitchen. She nudged him aside with her hip, which she registered far too late was a startling act of familiarity for two people who had known each other less than 2 days, and began to work the dough. "You're overworking it. The gluten's gone tight. Show me." So she did. She folded the dough, pressed, turned, folded, pressed, turned. He stood beside her and watched. She could feel the heat of him through the oversized shirt of his she was still wearing. "Where did you learn to bake?" he asked. "My mother." Before she passed, her hands kept working the dough. She did not look up. She used to say you could tell everything about a person by how they handled bread. Whether they were patient, whether they listened to the dough or tried to force it. "What does my bread tell you about me?" She looked up at him. He was closer than she had thought, close enough that she could see the individual shades of blue in his eyes, the fine lines at the corners of them, the small old scar that ran through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. "That you are trying very hard," she said, "to take care of something. And you are not sure you know how." The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "The bread," she added, quickly. "I meant the bread." "Right," he said. His voice was rough, "the bread." But his eyes said something else entirely. That evening they sat on the front steps of the manor. The fog had thinned just enough to show, in patches, the silver shapes of birches at the meadow's edge. Linnea sat, with her knees drawn up, the blanket from the hall wrapped around her shoulders. He sat beside her, not quite touching. "Do you miss it?" she asked. He turned his head slightly. Not to look at her, just to listen. "Whatever you had before this place," she said. The silence stretched. "I miss my mother's voice," he said. "She used to sing in the mornings. Old songs. Mountain songs that don't have words anymore." Linnea's chest went still. "I miss my father's hands," he said. "He could build anything. This wall. This step we're sitting on. He laid these stones when I was a boy. I handed him the mortar." She could not breathe right because she had dreamed of that voice. Or one like it. A woman humming mountain songs in the firelight. "My mother used to braid my hair before bed," she said. The words came out without her permission, every night. Even when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. He waited. "After she died, I could not stand anyone touching my hair. For years, I kept it short, because the length reminded me of her hands, and now? She touched the ends of her hair where it fell past her shoulders. Now I keep it long, because the length reminds me of her hands. He did not say anything for a long time. When he did, his voice was quiet. Grief is strange. The same thing that destroys you becomes the thing that keeps you connected to what you lost. My village healer says grief is love with nowhere to go. Your village healer sounds wise. She is 83 years old, and she still argues with the sheep. The corner of his mouth lifted. I'm glad you're here, he said. She looked at the fog, at the meadow she could no longer see, at the mountains that had vanished entirely, leaving only this house. This step. This man, so am I, she said, and meant it, in ways she was not ready to look at. On the third day she found the portrait. She had not meant to. She had been looking for a clean cloth. The cloth on the kitchen table had a wine stain on it from supper the night before, and Linnea was the kind of woman who could not eat over a stained cloth without thinking about the stain. She remembered seeing a linen press at the end of the upstairs hallway. The hallway was long, dust thick on the runner, a row of doors closed against rooms she had not seen. The linen press was where she had remembered it, but it was the wall opposite the press that stopped her. A frame, tall, heavy, draped in a yellowed sheet that had once been white. The corner of the sheet had slipped down off the top of the frame and exposed a strip of canvas underneath. Auburn hair, Linnea reached up and pulled the sheet down before she had decided to. The portrait was life-sized. A woman. Maybe 40, maybe 45. Auburn hair caught up at the back of her head with a green ribbon. A green wool dress with a high collar, hands folded in her lap. The painter had been good, very good. He had caught the small things, the slight asymmetry at the corner of her mouth, the way she sat with her shoulders not quite squared, as if she were about to stand up. But it was the eyes. The eyes were gray-blue. The eyes were Linnea's. The shape of the face was Linnea's. The angle of the nose, the set of the jaw, the small pointed chin. The thing that lived in the corners of the eyes that her mother had used to call the Harrow look. Linnea stepped back again. Her shoulders hit the linen press. She did not breathe. Could not. Because the woman in the painting was not her mother. The woman in the painting wore clothes that her mother had never owned, sat in a room her mother had never sat in. But the woman in the painting could have been her mother's sister, her aunt, her cousin. Her. Linnea, she turned. He was standing at the top of the stairs. His face had gone the color of the gray slate roof outside. I am sorry, she said, automatically. I was looking for clean linen. I did not mean, that is my mother. The words came out of him slowly, each one separate. Your mother? My mother. She could not finish. He came down the hall toward her, slow, careful. He stopped in front of the painting and looked up at it. He looked at it the way a man looks at a wound that has never quite healed. Her name was Aldrith, he said. She died 3 years ago. My father followed her, the same winter. He swallowed. The painter said it took him 7 months to finish. He said she would not sit still. She kept laughing at the dog. A small, broken sound came out of Linnea. It was almost a laugh. It was almost a sob. She could not tell which. She lifted her hand toward the painting, did not touch it, held her hand flat in the air a foot from the canvas. As if she could feel the heat of it. Alaric, she said. Yes. Why does she look like me? He did not answer. He stood beside her in the hallway, in the dust, in the gray light, and he did not answer. But the warmth in her chest, the warmth that had started at the wall and grown a little stronger every day, that warmth was now a roar. And under her boots, far down through the floorboards and the joists and the old foundations of a house she had not known existed. 3 days ago, the ground hummed. That night she could not sleep. She lay on the blankets by the hall fire and listened to the house breathe. Old houses breathed. Hers did in Finhollow. The little wooden box she called home. This house did not sigh. This house settled. A deeper sound. Heavier. Like a creature large enough that its breath moved the air in the room. She thought about the portrait. About her mother's voice. About the way her mother had begged her, dying, promise me you will not go past the old stone wall. She thought, Mama, what did you know? What did you know that you could not say? She thought, you were running. The understanding slipped into her chest the way cold slipped into a cottage in late autumn. Soft, Inevitable. You were running, Mama, from this place, from these people, from whatever it is that lives in this ground, she thought, but I am here now, and the ground knows me. She turned her face into the wool of the blanket, and she cried, quietly, the way she had taught herself to cry as a girl when no one was meant to hear her. She did not know what she was crying for. She was crying for her mother. She was crying for the man upstairs who could not sleep. She was crying for the portrait of a woman who had laughed at her dog. She was crying for the lamb in the barn who had run east when no other lamb in 8 years had ever run east. When she finally slept, near dawn, she did not dream. The ground hummed under her all the way down. He waited until the 4th evening to show her. The fog had thinned by then. Not lifted, just thinned. The mountains were still hidden. But you could see now, the line of the meadow and the dark wall of the east wood and the silver curve of a stream that ran along the lower fence. He came to find her in the garden. She had been pruning the roses. Wild canes gone leggy, tangled. Most of them had not been touched in years. But the wood was green when she scratched her thumbnail along it. The roots were strong. He stood at the garden's edge. He did not come in. "Walk with me," he said. She set down the shears. She followed him. He led her across the meadow, past the barn, past the low garden wall, down a path that wound between 2 stands of birch and came out on a flat shelf of stone above the lower pasture. He stopped. He looked at her. "Linnea," he said. She waited. "There are some things you need to know about this place, about me, and I have decided there is no good way." "All right, you should sit. I am all right standing." He almost smiled. "You are stubborn." "Yes." He took a breath, closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. Sits on what is called a ley line, an old one, old as the first wolves who built the first halls in these mountains. The land here listens. It hums beneath the feet of those who carry the bloodline of this estate, and it hums beneath the feet of those who are bonded to those who do. He paused. Most people walk across this ground and feel nothing. You said the ground felt alive the first day you came. Yes. In my family's history, there are only 2 kinds of people who have ever felt the land that way. Those who carry the bloodline of this estate, and those who are bonded to someone who does. The wind moved in the birches. Far down in the pasture, a single sheep called. "Alaric," she said. He took a step back. He looked up at the sky for a moment, and then he was not a man anymore. She had seen wolves before, pack wolves, the shifters who ran the lowland markets. But she had never seen this. The wolf that stood in front of her was enormous, dark brown, the color of mountain earth after rain, blue eyes that burned like cold fire, fur thick and rough. The coat of an animal who had been wild a long time, or alone a long time, or grieving, which was its own kind of wild. He stood perfectly still. He looked at her. Linnea did not move. Some part of her, the part that had survived 22 years on the edges of other people's worlds, was already running through a list of escape routes. Then something inside her rose, up out of her chest, up through her ribs. A thing that had been folded small and quiet inside her for as long as she could remember. She had not even known it was there. She walked toward him, slow, the way a shepherd walked toward a creature that did not yet trust her. He lowered his enormous head. He pressed his muzzle into her palm. The fur was coarse and warm under her fingers. His breath was hot against her wrist. The sound that came out of his throat was not a growl. It was not even quite a whine. It was something older than either. The sound of a thing that has been silent for a long time finally allowing itself to make a noise. Linnea sank to her knees in the grass. She wrapped her arms around his neck. She pressed her face into the rough fur of his ruff. The wolf shuddered. His whole body. She stayed there until the stars came out. When he finally pulled away from her and stepped back, and the wolf was a man again, kneeling in the wet grass in front of her, with his hair wild and his blue eyes wet. He could not speak for a long time. Linnea reached out and put her hand against his cheek. "It's all right," she said. "It is not." "Tell me." He swallowed. "My name is Alaric Vexalo. I am the Alpha King of the Eastern Realm. I have been here for 3 years. I left the court after my parents died because the throne felt like a coffin and the crown felt like chains, and I could not breathe in any room that expected me to be something other than what I was, which was a man who had lost everything and did not know how to stop losing it. She did not move her hand. My wolf went silent when my parents died, he said. The land went silent. The ley line went silent. For 3 years. Until you walked across my wall chasing a lamb with a crooked ear. And the ground started singing. He looked at her like a man drowning. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I could not say it without explaining everything else. And if I explained everything else, I thought you would leave. She thought about the portrait upstairs. She thought about her mother dying. Promise me. She thought about the warmth in her chest that had grown stronger every day. All right, she said. All right. All right. Alaric Vasallo, he laughed. It came out broken and wet. It was the most human sound she had ever heard. They walked back to the manor in silence. His hand found hers in the long grass, and she let him take it. When they reached the courtyard, she stopped. She looked at him. There is something you should know about me too, she said. All right. I do not know who my father was. She watched his face. He did not flinch. My mother never told me. She said it was safer that way. She made me promise. When she was dying, she made me promise I would never go past the old stone wall on the East Ridge. Not for any reason. Something moved behind his eyes. I kept that promise for 8 years, she said. Until this morning, he was very still. Alaric, she said. What did my mother know? He opened his mouth. He closed it. He was about to answer her when the dog in the courtyard began to bark. Hooves. Coming up the mountain road. Hard. Fast. Alaric's whole body changed. A horse came out of the dark. One horse. Lathered. Steam coming off it in the cold. The rider half fell off it. He went down on one knee in the courtyard mud. He kept his head down. His hand on his chest. He was an old man. Maybe 55. Iron gray hair tied back. A face that had spent a lot of years in the wind. He wore a dark cloak with a worn silver clasp at the shoulder, and under the cloak Linnea could see the dark green of a uniform she did not know. Your Grace, he said. Forgive me. I have ridden 3 days. Alaric did not move toward him. Doran, my king, get up. I cannot. Until I have said it. Said what? The old man lifted his head. His face in the light from the manor windows was the face of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, and had finally decided to put it down. Your father and mother, he said, did not die of fever. The courtyard went silent. Even the horse stopped moving. Linnea felt Alaric go very still in front of her. What did you say 3 years ago? The night the queen took ill. I was outside her door. I have not slept right since. Doran, they were poisoned, Your Grace. The world fell away by your cousin. Lord Cassian Drevard, I have proof. I have a witness. You said a witness, yes. Who? Doran looked at Linnea for the first time. His face changed. He looked at her the way a man looks at the ghost of his own daughter. Forgive me, my lady, he said. But what is your name? Linnea could not feel her hands. Linnea Harrow. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. Aylwin Harrow, he said. Your mother was the Queen's lady? Her closest woman. She slept in the room next to the Queen on the night the Queen was taken ill. She saw what was put into the wine. She saw who put it there. She came to me the next morning and told me. And then she was gone before nightfall. She left the castle. She left the realm. She left no trace. He bowed his head. I have looked for her for 22 years. Linnea could not breathe. She heard her mother's voice in the dream. I'm sorry I made you promise. She felt the tin pendant against her collarbone, the shepherd's crook clasp, the thing her mother had pressed into her hand on the last night and had not had the breath to explain. She put her hand around the pendant. It was warm. She felt Alaric's hand find the small of her back. Steady. Present. Get inside, he said quietly. To Doran, to her, to the night. Both of you now. The hall fire had gone low. He built it up. He moved around the room with a calm that Linnea did not understand until she realized it was the calm of a man who had finally been given something he could do. Doran sat by the fire and drank a cup of water and told them everything. The poisoning, the wine. The way Lord Cassian Drevard had sat at the king's right hand for years and smiled. The way he had ruled, since Alaric's disappearance as regent. The way the realm had survived but not thrived under him. Linnea listened. She watched Alaric's face in the firelight. She watched a man come back from somewhere very far away. When Doran was finished, he looked at her. My lady, he said. She shook her head. Linnea, your mother, was the bravest woman I ever met. She gave up everything she had to save you. I do not know who your father was, but I know your mother was a member of the Old Order, the Keepers of the Lay. They were a small council. Ancient. They tended the land in ways most of us no longer understand. 22 years ago, they were hunted. Most of them died. Your mother was one of the last. He paused. And when you crossed the wall this morning, the land knew her daughter. Linnea looked at her hands. She thought about her mother braiding her hair, about the soft melodies without words, about every winter she had spent alone in a cottage, so small she could cross it in 4 steps. She thought, and you knew. You knew, Mama. You knew what I was, and you knew what they would do to me if they found me, and you ran to a village no one cared about, and you gave me a small life so I would survive. She put her hand flat on the stone of the hearth. The stone was warm, not from the fire, from under it. She lifted her head. She looked at Alaric. I am going with you, she said. He looked at her. You do not have to. I am going with you. Linnea. My mother died running from this man. She gave her life so I could grow up without knowing my own name. And I have spent 22 years tending sheep in a village no one cares about because she told me to, and I would have spent the rest of my life there. Because I kept my promises. Her voice did not shake. But this morning the ground hummed under me, she said, and I am not running anymore. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and he stood in front of her. And he took her face in both of his hands, and he pressed his forehead against hers, and he did not say a word. The fire cracked behind them. Dorn sat very quietly in his chair. Outside, the fog began to thin. The wind was rising in the east. Tomorrow, Linnea thought, she would put on her boots, and she would carry her lamb in a basket, and she would ride down the mountain on a horse she had never ridden, and she would go to a city she had never seen, and she would walk into a court that had thought her dead before she was born. Tomorrow she would stop being a shepherd. Tonight, she stood with her forehead against the forehead of a king, and she listened to the ground hum under her boots. And she thought, Mama, I am sorry I broke my promise. I think you knew I would. I think you hoped I would. They rode out before dawn, 4 of them. Alaric, Linnea, Doran, and Briska the housekeeper, who had appeared at the kitchen door at first light with a wool bag on her shoulder and a flat look in her eyes. She was 60 years old. She had been with Alaric's family since before he was born. She was coming. Nobody argued with her. Linnea did not own a horse. She had walked everywhere she had ever needed to go, because shepherds in Fen Hollow did not own horses. The animal they put her on was a heavy-roan mare with a broad back and a steady eye, and Linnea sat on it the way a woman sits on a chair she does not trust. Briska held Thistle in a basket strapped behind her saddle. The lamb was furious about it. She bleated for the first 3 miles. Loud. Indignant, Linnea kept looking back. She's all right, Alaric said. She is screaming, she is alive. That is more than I expected from a 3-week-old lamb. You are not making this better. I was not trying to. He almost smiled when he said it. It was the only thing about that morning that did not hurt. They went down the mountain through the fog, through the gray birches, past the lower pasture where the wild ponies came in summer. She had not slept. She did not feel it yet. She had spent the last hours of the night sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea in her hand, listening to Alaric and Doran talk in low voices in the hall. She had heard her own name. She had heard her mother's name. She had heard Cassian. She had heard the words, if we go in fast, he will not have time to set the lie. She had heard the words, if we go in slow, he will kill her before we get there. She had not asked which option they had chosen. She had decided she would find out when they arrived. The first day was quiet. They rode through country Linnea did not know. That night they camped in a stand of pines a half-mile off the road. Alaric built the fire. Doran took the first watch. Briska made soup out of dried meat and dried mushrooms, and the last of the bread Linnea had baked 2 nights before. Linnea sat the fire with the bowl in her hands. Alaric sat down across from her. He had a knife, a small one, plain hilt, worn leather sheath. The kind of knife a man wore on his belt because he always wore it, not because he expected to use it. He laid it on the log between them. This was my father's, he said. She looked at it. You know how to hold one of these? He asked. I have skinned a sheep. Different, I know. Pick it up. She picked it up. The grip was warm from his hand. Like this, he said. He showed her. The way the thumb sat, the way the wrist locked, the way the elbow stayed in close to the body. She copied him. He corrected her wrist. She copied him again. He nodded. Good. That is the first time anyone has told me I held a knife correctly. Maeve used to say, I held a paring knife like I was scared of it. Were you? Yes. He looked at her. Are you scared now? She thought about it. She turned the knife over in her hand. The firelight ran along the edge of the blade. No, she said. It was not a brave answer. It was just the true one. There was something on the other side of fear, she thought. She had not been there before. She was there now. Good, Alaric said. He showed her where to put her thumb if she ever needed to drive the blade in. He said it the way a man says the prices at a market, quietly. Without theater, she listened. When she finally went to her bedroll, she lay on her side facing the fire, and she watched him take the second watch from Doran. The two men did not say a word as they traded places. Doran put his hand on Alaric's shoulder. Alaric put his hand over Doran's hand. They held it there for a moment. Then Doran went to his bedroll and Alaric went to the stone, and the night went on. Linnea slept. In her sleep, she dreamed she was holding a knife. In the dream, her hand did not shake. The ambush came at twilight the next day. The road dropped through a hollow between two low hills. Hawthorn on the right, a bog on the left. The kind of place a man chose when he wanted men on horses to slow down. Doran knew it. She saw him stiffen in the saddle 100 yards before they reached it. Linnea, Alaric said. Quiet. Even. Behind me, she moved her horse. The first arrow came from the hawthorn. The second took Doran in the side. He grunted. He did not fall. He drew his sword. And then the men came out of the hawthorn, 6 of them. Black cloaks. Faces wrapped. They moved fast. The first one reached Alaric. The first one did not live very long. Linnea was off her horse before she knew she had decided to be. She landed on her feet in the wet road with Alaric's father's knife in her hand, and her thumb in the place where Alaric had told her to put her thumb. She did not have to use it, because Alaric had stopped being a man. The shift happened so fast that she did not see it happen. One moment he was on the horse, and the next moment the wolf was in the road. Enormous. Dark. The blue of his eyes the only thing in him that had not changed. The first attacker died screaming. The second died trying to. The third turned his horse. The wolf was faster than the horse. The fourth threw down his sword. It did not save him. It happened in less time than it took to draw breath. The wolf stood in the middle of the road with his head low and his shoulders heaving and blood on his muzzle that was not his own. He looked at her. She nodded. He understood. He turned and went after the two who had run. Linnea did not watch. She turned to Doran. He was sitting in the wet road with his back against a tussock of grass and his hand pressed against his side, and the dark wet shine of blood was already past his fingers. Don't, he said. Get to the horses. I will catch up. Shut up, my lady. Shut up, Doran. She dropped to her knees beside him. She pulled his hand away from the wound. The arrow was still in. The shaft had broken off short. The head was still under his ribs. She knew this. She had not known she knew this. But her hands knew. Her hands had been taught. Her hands had been taught by her mother, years ago. In a kitchen in Fen Hollow, Linnea, when a man bleeds from his side, you do not pull the arrow out in the road. You break the shaft. You pack the wound. You move him. You sew him by the fire. Linnea had been 12. She had asked her mother why a shepherd's daughter needed to know how to pack an arrow wound. Her mother had not answered. Her mother had only said, "Promise me you will remember." Linnea had promised. And she had forgotten for 10 years, until now. Her hands moved without her thinking. She ripped a strip from the linen shirt under her cloak. She packed it hard against the wound. Briska was beside her without anyone telling Briska to be there, holding the leather flask of strong spirit they had been carrying for the cold. Linnea took it and tipped it into the wound, and Doran swore in 3 languages. "You will live," Linnea said. "I will not. You will. Because if you die before we reach the city, I will kill you myself." He looked at her. His old face cracked into something that was almost a smile. "Yes, my lady." Briska brought a needle. Briska kept a needle in a small wooden case in the inside pocket of her wool dress. Linnea took the needle. Her hands did not shake, she thought. "Mama, you knew. You knew you would die. You knew I would have to know how to do this. You taught me. You taught me everything I was going to need. And you never told me what for. And I am so angry with you. And I love you so much." She threaded the needle. She sewed Doran side in the wet road in the last light of a bad day. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels and put the heels of her hands against her eyes, and she did not cry. Briska put a hand on her shoulder. "You did right, my dear," the old woman said. "My mother taught me." "Yes," Briska said. "She did?" The wolf came back. He came out of the dusk slow, alone, his head down, his eyes still bright. He shifted. It was less violent this time. He went to Doran. He knelt. He took the old man's face in both of his hands. "You are not allowed to die," he said. "My king, you are not allowed. I have something for you, Doran fumbled at the inside of his cloak. Alaric helped him. Together they pulled out a folded sheet of parchment, old, yellowed at the edges. The wax seal had cracked. The crest pressed into the wax was the wolf's head in mountain laurel that hung above the hearth in the manor. Doran pressed the parchment into Alaric's hand. "Your father," he said, "wrote this the week before he died. He gave it to me," he said. "Doran, if I am wrong about my cousin, I will burn this letter with my own hand, and we will laugh about it in the spring," he coughed. We did not laugh in the spring. Alaric closed his hand around the parchment. He did not open it. He looked at the old man's face for a long time. Then he lifted Doran in his arms, as if Doran weighed nothing at all, and carried him to the horses. And they tied him to the saddle of the steadiest one. And they rode for 3 more hours through the dark before they stopped at an inn that Doran had told them about. Where the innkeeper was a man Doran had served with 30 years ago. And the innkeeper opened the door at the first knock and asked no questions and put a bed in the back room. Alaric did not open the letter that night. Linnea understood. She sat with him by the fire in the inn's small parlor. "He is alive because of you," Alaric said. "He is alive because my mother taught me when I was 12. Then he is alive because of both of you." She thought about that. "All right," she said. He almost smiled. It was, she thought, the smallest possible amount of smile, but it was for her. He opened the letter in the morning. He read it twice. He did not say anything when he finished. He handed it to Linnea. She read it standing up by the parlor window. The handwriting was a man's, bold, slanted. The kind of hand a man wrote when he was tired and meant every word. "My son, if you are reading this, I am dead, and I was right, and I am sorry. My cousin Cassian has been a friend to me my whole life. He stood beside me at my wedding. He held you on the day of your naming. He helped me bury my mother. I do not want to write what I am writing, but I have watched him these last 6 months, and I know what I am seeing. He wants the lay. He thinks the lay is power. He is right. He thinks he can take it. He is wrong. The lay does not answer to crowns. The lay does not answer to swords. The lay answers to blood, to bloodlines older than crowns. The keepers were such a bloodline. There were once 7 of them. 3 were murdered last year, 2 the year before. There is one left whose name I will not write here because I do not trust this paper to find her. Protect her. She is the heart of the land. Cassian cannot have her, and son. The crown does not belong to the man who can take it. It belongs to the land, and the land belongs to the people who tend it. And the people who tend it are not the ones in silk in the castle. They are the ones with mud on their boots. Forgive me for not seeing him sooner. I loved him. That was my mistake. Your father." Linnea read it twice. She handed it back to Alaric without a word. She sat down on the bench by the window. She thought about her mother in the kitchen at Fen Hollow, peeling carrots. Singing, she thought about a she-king she had never met. Writing this letter. Knowing, she thought, He knew about my mother. He knew there was one of us left. She lifted her head. Alaric was watching her. "You know," he said. "Quiet. Even, yes, you always knew I knew this morning. When I was sewing, Doran. When my hands remembered things I did not remember learning. Linnea, I am the last of the keepers." Yes, she did not break. She thought she might. The size of the words did not knock her flat. They sat in her mouth the way a stone sits in your hand when you have just picked it up. Heavy, cold, real. "What do we do?" she said. He looked at her. He said, "What do you want to do?" She thought about her mother. She thought about the letter. She thought about Doran, asleep in the next room with stitches she had put in him with her own hand. She said, I want to walk into the throne room and look that man in the face." He closed his eyes for a moment. He nodded. "All right." The capital sat in a bend of a river, white walls, slate roofs, banners that had once been gold and now were the color of old straw. Linnea had heard about the capital her whole life. She had never expected to see it. She had pictured it as a thing in a song. It was not a thing in a song, it was a city. Bigger than she had imagined. Louder. Dirtier, there were guards at the gate. They saw Alaric's face. One of them, a man in his 40s with a scar that ran from his temple down into his beard, stopped dead and put a fist over his heart and did not move until Alaric had passed. The other guards looked at the first guard. They put their fists over their hearts. Word would be running ahead of them. Linnea felt it. The way you felt a wind coming. The whole city was about to know that the Alpha King had ridden back through his own gate after 3 years. Cassian would know before they reached the castle. That was the point. That was, Alaric had said, the only way. The castle was bigger than the city. That should not have been possible. It was possible. They rode into the courtyard at noon. Briska had stayed behind at the inn with Doran, who would be brought up to the castle the next morning by carriage once his stitches had set. Briska had handed Linnea the basket with thistle inside it at the city gate, with a flat look that said, plainly, "The lamb goes where you go, child." She always has. So Linnea rode into the courtyard of the Alpha King's castle with a 3-week-old lamb in a basket in front of her saddle. She would think about that, later, when she could not sleep. That she had walked into the heart of a king's hall. On her first day with a lamb in her arms, the court came out to meet him. They poured out of the great doors like water out of a cracked jar. Men in heavy coats. Women in stiff dresses. Servants in dark green, counselors in gray. And in the middle of them at the top of the steps stood a man. He was perhaps 45. He was tall. He had a face that was almost handsome. The eyes were the wrong eyes for the face. Too pale, too still. A pale gray, almost white. The kind of eyes that did not blink when they should. He came down the steps with his arms out. "Cousin," he said. He said it loud enough for the whole courtyard. "Cousin, Alaric, by every god in the high country. You are home." He embraced Alaric. Alaric did not embrace him back. He let the man hold him for one long moment, then he stepped back. Smooth, polite, without expression. "Cousin," he said. That was all he said. Cassian's pale eyes flicked to Linnea. She watched him register her. She watched him register the cloak, the boots, the heather wool, the tin shepherd's crook clasp at her throat. The lamb, she watched the moment when his eyes went past the cloak and the boots and the clasp and saw her face. He did not flinch. He was too good for that. But she saw the small tightening in the corner of his mouth. She saw the half-second in which he knew exactly who she was. He knew her mother's face. He had wanted her mother's face very badly. Once he smiled. He bowed. He said, "And who is this lovely creature?" Alaric said, "My intended." The court did not breathe. "From," Cassian said. "Where, may I ask?" "That," Alaric said, "is not a question for the courtyard." The smile on Cassian's face did not move, the eyes did. She had a room. It was bigger than her entire cottage. It had a bed she could have laid 4 of herself in and never met any of the others. It had a window with curtains the color of wet moss. It had a wash basin that someone had already filled with warm water. It had a tray of food on a table by the window. She did not eat any of it. She did not touch any of it. She walked the room twice. A maid came, a young woman. Eyes lowered. She set out a fresh dress on the bed and was gone again before Linnea had decided what to ask her. Linnea looked at the dress. It was beautiful. It was also exactly the size of a cage. She thought, not yet. She put her cloak back on. She left the room. She found the records. It took her 3 nights. The first night she only got as far as the long gallery on the 2nd floor before a guard found her and asked, very politely, if she had lost her way to dinner. The second night she got to the door of the archives but did not go in. There were 2 guards. She watched them. She watched their changes. She watched when they coughed. She watched who brought them water. The 3rd night, she went in. She did not steal a key. She did not pick a lock. She walked in behind Briska. Briska had arrived in the castle that afternoon with Doran, who was wrapped and pale but alive and walking on his own. Briska had taken one look at Linnea's face and said, "What is it you mean to do, child?" And Linnea had said I mean to find the records of the order my mother belonged to. And Briska had said all right. Briska, it turned out, had been wiping the dust off the shelves of the Royal Archives once a season for 40 years. Briska had a key. The archive was cold. It smelled of old paper and old leather, and something faintly green underneath, like dried herbs that had been pressed between pages a long time ago. The keepers of the lay had their own shelf. It was small. 3 books, 2 ledgers, a bundle of letters tied with red yarn. She took the bundle of letters down first. The yarn was old, faded, not the color of fresh blood, but the color of old wine. She knew this yarn. She had a coil of it in the bottom of her work basket in the cottage in Fenhollow. Her mother had used it her whole life. To tie up dried herbs, to mark her place in a book, to wrap around Linnea's wrist when Linnea was small and feverish. Linnea sat down at the table. She opened the letters. She read for an hour. She found her mother's name in the second to last one. She found Cassian's signature on the order to have the keepers found and silenced. She found the date. 23 years ago. 6 months before Linnea had been born. She closed the letters. She put them inside her cloak. She looked across the table at Briska. I have what I came for, Linnea said. Then we go. One thing. She walked back to the shelf. She tore a thread of the old red yarn from the bundle that had tied the letters, a short piece, as long as her smallest finger. She put it in the small pouch at her belt. She did not know yet why. She would know in 2 days. He came to her at midnight, not the cousin Alaric. He came to her room with his hair wet from washing and his face in a state she had not seen on it before, tired, hopeful, angry but not at her. He sat on the edge of the bed. She sat next to him. Doran is sitting up, he said finally. Eating soup. Complaining about the soup, that is a good sign. He says Briska made the soup. He says she made it badly on purpose because she is still angry at him for leaving the manor without telling her. Linnea almost laughed. He also says, Alaric said, that you are stronger than he expected. He says he did not know what to expect, but he says he was wrong about whatever it was. He says his voice caught. He says your mother would be proud. She had to look at the curtain for a moment. She had to wait. Then she said, I went into the archive tonight. I know, you know. Briska sent word. I have proof. About Cassian, about the order, about the keepers, Linnea. 22 years he has been waiting for the last of us to die. 22 years my mother kept me alive by keeping me small, Linnea. And he sat in this castle and waited. And he killed your parents because they were going to figure it out. And he ruled in your name for 3 years because he was getting ready to do the same thing to you. And the only reason he has not done it yet is because I walked across a wall. Alaric closed his eyes. He opened them. He put his hand against the back of her neck. His palm was warm. It steadied her in a way she did not have a word for. We will end him, he said. We will do it correctly. We will do it before the council. We will do it with the witnesses and the records and Doran's testimony and your testimony and the letter from my father. We will not give him a back door. All right, tomorrow. All right, Linnea. Yes, you should sleep. I will not sleep, I know. He stayed with her until she did sleep. Finally, somewhere in the small hours, he laid her back on the pillow. He covered her with the blanket. He kissed her temple. He went back to his own chambers an hour before dawn, because that was what propriety required of an alpha king in his own court. And Alaric had always been a man who understood propriety even when it cost him. That hour was the one Cassian had been waiting for. She came awake the way an animal comes awake. All at once, her hand was under the pillow before her eyes were open because under the pillow was the knife that had been Alaric's father's. She had put it there before she lay down. She had not told Alaric. She had not told anyone. 3 of them in the room. The first man saw the knife. He laughed. The laugh was short. It was the last thing he did with his throat in working order. Linnea did not aim. She did not think. Her hand went out the way her mother had once shown her how to pour water from a pitcher. Smooth. Steady. Don't spill. The knife went in under his jaw and out again, and he made a sound that was not a word and went sideways into the curtain. The second man was bigger. He hit her in the side of the head. The room went white. She did not lose the knife. She remembered later that this had been important to her. Do not lose the knife. Do not lose the knife. She rolled. She came up against the bedpost. She slashed wildly. She felt the blade catch on cloth and then on something underneath. The third man hit her in the temple with the flat of his palm. The room went away. She was awake before she opened her eyes. She had learned that at 14, sitting up nights with her dying mother. Do not let them see that you are awake. Listen first. She listened. She was on a cold floor, stone, damp, cold deeper than a basement, somewhere underground. There was straw under her cheek. There was a smell of mildew. She was on her side. Her hands were behind her. There was iron at her wrists. There were no voices. There was a soft, regular dripping. She moved her left hand. Iron clinked. She kept her breathing even. She thought, the yarn. The yarn was in the pouch at my belt. They will not have known to look there. They will have searched my cloak for the letters. They will have found the letters. They will not have thought about the yarn. She thought, did I leave it? She thought, did I leave it on the windowsill the way Briska showed me? She thought, with a cold clarity that felt almost like joy. Yes, I did. In the white room far above the dungeon, the king woke alone. He was already alone. He had left her room an hour before dawn, but he woke knowing. He could feel it. The bond was cold. He sat up in his own bed. He put his bare feet on the cold floor. He stood up. He walked the corridor between his chambers and hers in his bare feet and his half-tucked shirt. He saw the door of her room standing open. He saw the curtain in the corner of her room that had been pulled half off its rod. He saw the dark line on the floor in front of the curtain that he did not at first understand and then did. He saw the small thing on the windowsill that should not have been there. He went to the window. He picked up the small thing, a short piece of yarn, old, faded. The color of dried wine. Tied in a single careful knot, he closed his hand around it. He did not breathe for a long moment. Then he turned and he walked out of the room, and he did not bother to put on his boots, and he went down the long corridor with the yarn in one fist and his father's sword in the other. And the guards in the corridor saw his face and did not speak to him and did not get in his way. And he walked through the great gallery and down the wide stairs and across the long hall and past the council chamber, and he kicked open the doors of the throne room with the heel of his bare foot. Cassian was there. Of course he was. He was sitting on the lower of the two thrones, in a robe, with a cup of warm wine. As if a man's morning began here, 3 guards in dark green stood by the wall. Cassian smiled. Cousin, he said. Up early, Alaric did not slow. He walked the length of the room. He stopped 6 feet from the lower throne. He held up his fist. He opened the small piece of yarn lay in his palm. Cassian's pale eyes flicked to it, held on it, came back up to Alaric's face. The smile was still there. Cousin, Cassian said. Soft now. What is that you have there? Alaric looked at him. He did not raise his voice. He spoke quietly enough that the guards along the wall had to lean forward to hear him. He said, You are going to bring me my wife, cousin. You are going to bring her up out of whatever hole you have put her in. You are going to bring her up here, on her own feet, without a hand on her, without a mark on her that she did not put there herself. Cassian opened his mouth. You are going to do this, Alaric said in the next hour, because if you do not, I am going to burn this castle to the ground, with every stone of it, and every banner of it, and every counselor of it, who chooses to stand with you, and you in it. The throne room did not breathe. Outside the high windows, somewhere far off in the city, a bell began to ring. The wind was rising in the east. Cassian did not move. He took a slow sip. He set the cup down on the arm of the throne. Cousin, he said, I do not know what you are talking about. Alaric did not blink. 1 hour, you come into my hall, in bare feet, making threats, my hall, at dawn. 1 hour, Cassian. The guards along the wall did not move. They had been Cassian's men for 3 years. But the man at the door, the captain of the gate, the one with the scar that ran from his temple into his beard, the one who had put his fist over his heart when Alaric had ridden through. That man stepped forward 1 pace. He drew his sword. He laid it flat across his own forearm. He held it out toward Alaric, a second sword. Offered, Cassian saw it. The smile slipped. Just at the corner. Just for a breath, the 2 other men by the wall looked at the captain. They looked at each other. One of them set down his halberd. The other one set down his halberd. Cassian's pale eyes finally moved. Cousin, he said. Softer now. Let us be reasonable. Bring her up. I do not have her. Bring her up, Alaric. Listen to me. There has been a misunderstanding. Bring her up, cousin Cassian. The name was a whip. Cassian stopped talking. In the silence, far down through the stones of the castle, a sound began. It was not a sound, exactly. It was a hum. The captain of the gate felt it in the bones of his feet. He looked at the floor under his boots. He did not understand. He looked up at Alaric. Alaric did not look down. He was watching Cassian. And Cassian, who had spent 22 years hunting the bloodline that could wake this kind of hum out of the stones of this castle, had gone the color of old parchment. That is not possible, he whispered. Bring her up. That is not possible. You did not kill them all, Cassian. You missed one. And she walked across my wall 5 days ago chasing a lamb. And now she is in this castle. And the ground knows her name. Down in the dark, Linnea sat up. The iron at her wrists rattled. She had heard the hum before her captors had. She had heard it because it was under her. In the floor of the cell, in the stones of the wall. The same warm settling she had felt at her own boots in the meadow on the first morning. Stronger now. Bigger, she thought, very calmly. All right, I am awake. I am alive. My head hurts. My wrists are bound. I have no weapon. I have no light. I have one thing. She moved her left hand inside the iron cuff. The cuff was heavy, old. The iron had been forged for a man's wrist. Not hers. There was room. She thought about her mother in the kitchen at Fen Hollow, Linnea. When a thing is too tight, you do not pull. You twist. You make the smallest part of the thing, the part that goes through. Linnea had been 6. She had been trying to get her hand into a jar. She had understood. She tucked her thumb into the soft of her palm. She pressed the bones of her hand together. She turned her wrist as far as it would go. The iron bit, the skin gave. She felt the warm slip of her own blood. She did not stop. She did not look. She breathed out slow. The way her mother had taught her to breathe when she was helping a ewe in a hard lambing. The cuff scraped, the cuff held. She breathed, she twisted, the cuff slipped off her left hand. She did not stop to be glad. She reached with her free hand to the pouch at her belt, which they had not searched because it was a small leather thing the color of mud. And she pulled out the long, thin pin Briska had given her 2 nights ago. An old woman keeps things in her hair, child. Linnea worked the pin into the lock at her right wrist. She had never picked a lock. She had picked the latch of a sheep pen for 10 years. This was not very different. The lock gave. She stood up. The cell was small. 6 paces by 6. 1 door, iron banded. A small grate at the top. A line of dim light from a torch somewhere in the corridor outside. She walked to the door. She put her ear to the grate. 1 man, breathing. The breathing of a man who was almost asleep on his feet, she thought. Mama, I am sorry for what I am about to do, she thought. No, I am not. She put her shoulder against the iron. She made her voice small. She let it shake. She said, please. The breathing on the other side stopped. Please, I cannot breathe. Something is wrong. Please, step back from the door. I can't stand up. The key turned. The man was in the doorway with his torch in one hand and his sword half drawn in the other. And Linnea was not on the floor. And Linnea was not crying. And Linnea was behind the door. And she brought the iron cuff that had been on her left wrist down on the back of his head with both of her hands, the way she had brought down a mallet on a fence post 1,000 times. And the man dropped. She caught the torch before it hit the straw. She took his sword. She stepped over him. She walked out of the cell. The hum in the floor was louder now. She could feel it in her teeth. She went up. Stone stairs. Narrow. Worn in the center from 1,000 years of boots, the corridor at the top opened into a wider one, and the wider one ran along the back of the kitchens. And the kitchens were already alive at this hour with the small sounds of the peoples who started the fires before the castle was awake. A woman saw her, a cook. Middle-aged. Apron. Floured hands. The cook took one look at Linnea, at the blood on her wrist, at the sword in her hand, at the loose hair, at the dress that was not a dress, because she had never put on the green dress, and she was still in the linen shift she had slept in. And the cook did not scream. The cook said, "Up the back stair, my lady. 2 flights. The door at the top is unlocked. He is in the throne room." Linnea looked at her. The cook said, "Your mother was kind to mine. A long time ago." Linnea could not answer. She nodded. She ran. She came into the throne room through the side door. not the great doors at the front, the small door behind the lower throne, the one the servants used. She came in barefoot, in a linen shift, with blood drying on her left wrist and a guard's sword in her right hand, and her hair down around her shoulders like dark auburn rope. Alaric was standing 6 feet from Cassian. Cassian was on his feet now. The cup of wine was on the floor. The captain of the gate had 2 swords, one in each hand. He was standing at Alaric's left shoulder. There were 9 men in the room. 8 of them looked at the great doors when Linnea came through the small one, and her bare feet hit the stone of the dais, and the hum in the floor jumped. Cassian turned. He saw her. His face came apart, not all at once. The pale eyes first. They went the color of milk. Then, the mouth. That mouth said something that was not a word. Linnea did not look at him. She looked at Alaric. Alaric had gone very still. His eyes moved over her. Wrist, sword, bare feet, hair. The small bruise on her temple. He breathed out. He almost smiled. He said, "You did not need me," she said. "I still wanted you." The captain of the gate, who was a man of 55, who had served 3 kings and would tell this story at 3 weddings before he died, would later say he had never heard a sentence land the way that one landed in that room. Alaric crossed to her. He did not run. He walked, steady, even. The way a man crosses a field he has crossed his whole life. He took her bleeding wrist in his hand. He looked at it. He looked at her. He said, "Stand with me." She said, "I am." She walked to the bloodstone. It sat at the center of the throne room floor, a round dark slab set flat into the flagstones. Linnea had not noticed it yesterday. She noticed it now. The hum was loudest here. She knelt on it. She put both of her palms flat against the stone. The light came up out of the floor, not warm light, not torchlight, a blue-green, the color of moss in a deep wood, the color of the sea where it was very deep, the color her mother's eyes had been on the morning of the day her mother had died. It came up through the stone and through Linnea's palms, and through her arms and into the rafters, and through the rafters into the sky, and outside in the city below the castle. Every dog on every street stood up and lifted its head and was silent. The hum became a chord. It was not loud. It did not need to be loud. Every person in the throne room heard it in their bones. Every counselor who had not yet decided which side to stand on, decided. Cassian stood by the lower throne with his hands at his sides. He did not move. He did not run. There was no place to run to. The land itself was awake under his feet, and it was not on his side. The captain of the gate walked across the room to him. He did it quietly. He did not raise his sword. He took Cassian by the elbow, the way a man takes the elbow of an old uncle who has had too much wine at a wedding. "My lord," he said, "come with me." Cassian did not resist. He did not look at Alaric. He did not look at Linnea. He looked at the bloodstone, at the blue-green light, at the impossible thing that had risen out of the ground because a shepherd's daughter from a village no one cared about had knelt down on it. He said one thing, very quietly, on the way out. He said, "Your mother was the bravest woman I ever knew." Linnea did not answer. She did not turn her head. She let him pass. The doors closed behind him. There was a trial. It was short. The records had been kept. The witnesses had survived. Doran said what he had seen. Linnea said what her mother had told her. The letter from Alaric's father was read aloud, and when the steward who read it reached the line about mud on boots, half the council was weeping. Cassian Drevard was stripped of his titles, his name, and his lands. He was not killed. Alaric had been very clear about that. He will live the rest of his life as a man whose name no one speaks, Alaric said. He will not be free. He will not be loved. He will not be remembered. A counselor asked if that was mercy. Alaric said, "It is justice. Mercy is a different room. He may visit it on his own time." Doran did not stay. When his wound had closed, when the trial had ended, when the spring came down out of the high country, and the meadows below the castle filled with new grass, the old captain came to find Linnea in the garden. She was on her knees in the dirt. She was planting something. He stood at the edge of the garden the way Alaric had once stood at the edge of the rose garden. "He did not come in, my lady," he said. She looked up. She knew before he opened his mouth. "You are going home," she said. "I am, to the high country. I have a brother there. He has been writing me letters for 30 years asking when I am coming back. I have run out of reasons not to." She stood up. She crossed the garden. She put her arms around the old man. He was stiff for a moment, then he was not. He put his hand on the back of her head, just for a moment. The way a father puts a hand on the back of a daughter's head. Your mother, he said into her hair, would be so proud of you. She closed her eyes. She said, tell her, if you see her first. He left the next morning. He did not look back. Alaric did not call him back. A year passed. The roses came back in Aldric's garden. Linnea had planted 30 new canes. They opened in late June, and the whole walled garden filled with the smell of them. And Brisca said it had not smelled like that since the year before the old queen had taken ill. Thistle had 2 lambs of her own. She was the worst mother in the kingdom. Linnea bottle-fed both of them in the barn at midnight and laughed about it, and said it was clearly hereditary. Old Maeve came down from Fenhollow once a month. The royal supply route brought her fresh herbs and dried roots, and a wheel of cheese from the lowland markets every fortnight. And Maeve, who was 84 years old and still arguing with the sheep, sat in the warm kitchen of the manor and drank tea with Brisca, and complained about both of them under her breath. Linnea was carrying a child. She would know in the autumn that it was a daughter. She would name the child Aylwin. On a morning in late summer, Alaric was mending the low stone wall by the front step of the manor. The one his father had laid. The one he had handed his father the mortar for when he was a boy. He had taken down a section of it. He had been relaying it for 3 days. Slow, careful, stone by stone. Linnea came out of the manor with 2 cups of tea. She handed him one. She sat on the step. He set the last stone. He stood up. He put his hand flat on the top of the wall the way she had seen him. Put his hand flat on stones the first week she had known him. He looked at the wall. He looked at the meadow beyond it. He looked at her on the step, her hand on the small round of her belly, her hair down, her boots muddy. The tin shepherd's crook clasped at her throat, catching the late summer light. He said very quietly, "The fog lifted a long time ago," she said, "and I am still here." He sat down next to her on the step his father had laid. He drank his tea. Somewhere in the meadow, a lamb called. Thistle answered. A second lamb called, a third. The ground under their boots hummed, soft, steady, the way a heart hums when it has stopped running, and finally come home. And Linnea Harrow, 23 years old, shepherd and queen and the last daughter of the last of the keepers, leaned her head against the shoulder of the man she loved, and she closed her eyes and she listened. For 8 years she had kept a promise to a dead woman. For 1 year she had broken it. The land was singing. It would sing for a long time. 3 years later, on a morning that smelled of wood smoke and rosemary, Linnea sat on the front step of the manor with a small girl in her lap. The child was 2.5 years old, had auburn hair, gray-blue eyes. The Harrow looked plain as morning, sitting in the corners of a face that was still too round to belong to anyone but a baby. Her name was Aylwin. She was holding a piece of bread in one fist. The bread was the size of her hand. She had been carrying it for an hour. She had not eaten any of it. She was offering it very seriously to a lamb who had been dead for 2 weeks, but whom Aylwin had not yet been told about. The lamb was Thistle, the first Thistle. The one with the crooked ear, the one who had run east through the fog 3 years ago, the one who had led a shepherd's daughter across a wall she had been forbidden to cross. She had died old, as lambs went. 5 was old for a sheep. Thistle had reached 5, and then a winter morning had come when she had not stood up from her straw, and Linnea had sat in the barn beside her for 2 hours, and the old lamb had pressed her muzzle into Linnea's palm one last time and gone to sleep. Linnea had buried her in the rose garden. Under a stone Alaric had carved with his own hands. The stone said one word, Thistle. That was all it needed to say. Aylwin had not understood, at 2, that Thistle was gone. She had asked every day for 2 weeks where Thistle was. Linnea had not lied to her. Linnea did not believe in lying to children. But she had said gently, Thistle has gone to sleep, my love, and she will not wake up. And Aylwin had nodded the way small children nod when they have been told a thing they cannot yet hold, and she had kept carrying bread out to the barn anyway. Today the bread was for Thistle's daughter. The lamb's name was Brindle. She was 3 years old, fat, slow, and a much better mother than Thistle had ever been. She had a lamb of her own this spring, a small black-faced thing that Aylwin called baby and would not be moved off of. Linnea watched her daughter offer the bread to Brindle, watched Brindle take it in 2 soft bites, watched Aylwin laugh. A high, clean laugh that belonged to a child who had never been hungry, had never been cold, had never spent a winter alone in a cottage so small you could cross it in 4 steps. That was the thing Linnea thought about most mornings. She thought, I am giving her the childhood my mother could not give me. She thought, I am giving her warm bread and a barn full of sheep, and a father who comes in at noon with mud on his boots, and a grandmother in the village who is teaching her the names of every plant in the garden. She thought, I am giving her the world my mother died to make. Old Maeve was 86 now. She had moved up from Fenhallow the year after Aylwin was born. Briska had not asked her. Alaric had not asked her. Maeve had simply arrived at the manor one autumn morning with a small wool bag and a basket of dried herbs and an expression that did not invite discussion. She had taken the room above the kitchen. She had unpacked her herbs. She had argued with Briska for the first time within 20 minutes of arrival, and the 2 old women had been arguing affectionately ever since. She was teaching Aylwin the herbs. She had been teaching Aylwin the herbs since the child could sit up. Aylwin, at 2.5, could identify chamomile, comfrey, lemon balm, and yarrow on sight. She could not tie her own shoes. She could tell you what comfrey was, for if you asked her, and she would tell you it was for broke skin, and she would say it with the same gravity with which Maeve had once taught Linnea the same word. Linnea watched her daughter walk back to the step with the empty hand the bread had been in, and she thought, Mama, you taught me how to pack an arrow wound when I was 12. And I did not understand why, and I forgot. And then I remembered, in a wet road with an old man bleeding to death in my hands, and he lived, because of you. Now I am teaching your granddaughter the herbs. And one day, perhaps, she will be in some place she does not expect to be, with someone she did not expect to need her, and her hands will remember. That is what we do, Mama. We teach the small things. We do not always know what for. We trust the future to know what the small things were for. She closed her eyes against the late summer sun. Alaric came up from the lower meadow with 2 more stones on his shoulder. He was still mending the wall. The wall was always being mended. There was always a stone that had slipped, a section that had loosened, a corner that needed relaying. Alaric did this work the way other men did prayer. Daily, patiently, without ceremony. He had grown his hair longer in the 3 years. There were 2 threads of gray at his left temple now, which Linnea liked and which he pretended not to notice. He was still broad through the shoulders. He still wore the same dark wool shirts with the sleeves shoved to his elbows. The only thing that had changed about him was his face. His face had softened. Not the bones. The bones were the same. It was the something around them. The almost smile that used to live in the corner of his mouth, that she had once chased across his face the way a dog chases sunlight across a floor, that almost smile had come out of hiding. It lived openly now. It came when Aylwin ran across the courtyard. It came when Briska burned the bread. It came when Linnea sat fast on the step in the late summer light, with a child in her lap and a bowl of beans she was meant to be snapping for supper. He set the stones down. He came over to the step. He knelt in front of his daughter, which put his face roughly level with hers. What did you give to Brindle? He asked. Bread. You did not eat your bread. It was for the lamb. It was for you, and then you would have eaten another piece. And you would have given that one to the lamb. No. This was the lamb's bread. The lamb's bread is different. Alaric considered this. He looked at Linnea over the top of their daughter's head. He said, She has your logic. Linnea said, She has your stubbornness. He laughed. He kissed his daughter's forehead. He stood up. He sat down on the step beside Linnea. He put his hand flat on the small of her back the way he had put it there the night. Doran had ridden up out of the dark, the night her whole life had cracked open. He put it there because he always put it there. Because it was a thing he did. Because his hand on her back was, after 3 years of marriage, the answer to a question her body kept asking and his body kept answering, and neither of them had to say out loud anymore. The ground hummed under the step. It had not stopped humming in 3 years. It had only grown softer, steadier. The way a hearth grows steadier when the fire has been burning for a long time, and the stones around it have remembered how to be warm. Linnea leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. Aylwyn leaned her head on her mother's chest. A breeze came up out of the lower meadow. It carried the smell of cut hay and warm stone and roses, late roses, the last of the summer's bloom. Linnea closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. She thought, I hope you can see her, Mama. I hope you can see this little girl with your name and my hair and his eyes. I hope you can hear her laugh. I hope you can see the bread she did not eat because she wanted to feed it to a sheep. I hope you can see the wall he is mending. I hope you can see the step we are sitting on. I hope you can see the rose garden you would have loved. I hope you can hear the land. I hope wherever you are, the land where you are sings too. Somewhere in the meadow, Brindle called for her lamb. The lamb answered. The lamb's lamb answered after that, in the high, uncertain voice of a thing that had only been alive for 6 weeks. Aylwyn lifted her head. She said very seriously, Mama, the babies are singing. Linnea opened her eyes. She looked at her daughter. She looked at her husband. She looked at the meadow her mother had spent 22 years running from, the meadow her mother had given everything to keep her daughter away from, the meadow her daughter had finally walked into because a small, stubborn creature had pulled her there. She kissed the top of Aylwyn's head. She said, Yes, my love. They are singing, and the land sang with them.